2006, a referendum was passed in Michigan which banned the use of racial criteria in college admissions. Recently, the U.S. Supreme Court rendered a decision on this referendum and upheld it. Now, many liberals and progressives decried this ruling, but I actually agree with it, and I'll explain why. First, let me just say that I understand why affirmative action was implemented. John F. Kennedy first signed it into law as a means of helping African Americans and other minorities to overcome systemic biases which created an unequal set of circumstances and denied them the same opportunities as most Americans. At this time, our country was still embroiled in the struggle for civil rights and dealing with Jim Crow laws which specifically treated black Americans differently from white Americans. Affirmative action would allow black Americans to educate themselves and to have the opportunity to prosper in the face of discrimination. However, now that it is 50 years later, we must reappraise the situation, especially if the laws are being challenged. Many progressives have declared that this ruling is just another that declares that the United States is a post-racial society and that we don't have to worry about racism anymore. However, I disagree. I think that affirmative action, at least as it relates to college admissions, is racially discriminatory. I simply cannot defend the practice of public universities admitting less qualified candidates while rejecting equally or more well-qualified candidates strictly on the basis of race and diversity. If the vast majority of qualified candidates just so happen to be white, then so be it. I understand that minorities still oftentimes do not have the same access to good public education prior to college, but we should not punish other qualified students because of this. There is already plenty to consider when accepting or rejecting applicants. Schools need not necessarily rely upon only grade point average or standardized testing scores. They can consider students' interest, participation in extracurricular activities, clubs and sports, involvement in the community, passion for education and their field of study, or their ability to sell themselves in an essay. Schools can readily accept students who may not be academically elite, but who can still achieve success. Now, I know I'm going to be stereotyping here, but just bear me out on my lack of political correctness in favor of my larger point. It is just as ridiculous to extend privileges to black or Latino students on the basis of their race as it would be to reject, say, qualified Asian students because their race would be overrepresented in the university population. Schools should not have an obligation to fulfill a quota. They should have an obligation to ensure that the best qualified candidates are accepted, who have the best chance at graduating and representing a college degree in a manner that makes it mean something, regardless of their heritage. Now, many critics liken this decision to the recent ruling striking down parts of the Voting Rights Act, which required certain states with a history of racial discrimination, I'm looking at you, the South, to clear their voting requirements with the federal government before elections. Now, that decision was a 5-4 opinion along strict partisan lines and raises many concerns when we consider the fact that Republicans in many states are attempting to disenfranchise minority voters by instituting voter ID laws and other obstructions. Immediately following that decision, many of the southern states immediately started taking such actions, proving why the requirements were necessary. However, I don't think that these cases are an apt comparison. For one, the decision to uphold the affirmative action ban was 6-2, not a strict partisan vote, and I can understand why. Voting is a fundamental right for all citizens and should have no special requirements. On the other hand, getting into a good college should be merit-based. While I understand that this is a controversial issue and there are sound arguments to support either side, I believe that the court got this one right. I'm going to make a bit crude of an analogy here, but one that I think demonstrates my larger point. Now, Major League Baseball has seen a decrease in African American players recently, and there's been much lament regarding this. But I don't think it would be fair for Major League Baseball teams to draft or employ African American players that were less qualified than other players simply so that they could have a proportional level of diversity on their teams representing the diversity that we see in our society. It simply isn't logical. In the end, I do not think that this case declares racism to be a thing of the past. In fact, I think that by allowing states to get rid of racial preference in college admissions, we are removing a form of racism that has outlived its original intent. I am Prototype Atheist. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, share with anyone else you think would be interested, and subscribe to my channel for future updates. You can also find me on Facebook at facebook.com/prototypeatheist and on Twitter at protoatheist.